I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into my own birthday party and felt like a guest in my own house. 40 years old. That's what the cake said. Ashley had insisted on making it memorable. Caterers, bartender, a rented ice sculpture I didn't ask for. Half the guest list were people from her world. Finance types with polished smiles and expensive watches. I told myself she was proud of me. Now I know better. I was standing near the kitchen island, holding a drink someone had placed in my hand, when I noticed them. Ashley wasn't hosting. She wasn't checking on guests. She wasn't even near me. She was standing across the living room, close enough to Daniel Mercer that there wasn't space for air between them. Daniel, her Wall Street boss, the man whose name had been coming up more and more in our house over the last year. At first it looked harmless. They were laughing, leaning in slightly to hear each other over the music. Normal. Then his hand settled on the small of her back. Not a brief touch, not an accidental brush. It rested there, confident, familiar, and she didn't move. In fact, she leaned closer. Her hand touched his forearm when she laughed at something he said. The kind of touch you don't notice unless you're watching carefully. I was watching carefully. I walked toward them slowly, calm on the outside. I wasn't going to be the insecure husband. I wasn't going to cause a scene at my own party. Everything good over here? I asked evenly. Ashley turned, her smile flickering for half a second before it reset. Of course, she said brightly. Daniel was just congratulating you. Daniel extended his hand to me. Firm handshake. Direct eye contact. Big milestone, he said. You must be proud. Yeah, I replied. I am. His hand dropped, back to her waist. That was the first crack. I stepped slightly closer to Ashley, close enough that his hand had to shift. It did, but only barely. Ashley's eyes hardened. Mark? She murmured through her smile. Can you not? Not what? I asked quietly. You're hovering, she said. Louder now. It's weird. A couple of nearby guests turned subtly. I felt heat rise in my neck. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused anyone. I'm just standing here, I said. Daniel lifted his hands slightly. Hey, I don't want to intrude. But he didn't step away. Ashley laughed lightly. Mark gets like this sometimes, she told Daniel. Birthday anxiety. There were small chuckles. Polite. Uncomfortable. I stared at her. Birthday anxiety? I'm fine, I said, keeping my voice level. She leaned in closer, her smile frozen but her eyes sharp. You're making this awkward, she whispered. Stop. Stop what? Existing? Then she straightened and said, louder. Maybe you've had too much on an empty stomach. Now people were openly listening. In the span of 30 seconds, I had gone from husband to unstable embarrassment. Daniel finally drifted away toward the bar. Ashley stayed behind just long enough to glare at me. You couldn't just let me have one professional conversation? She hissed. Professional? I asked. Her jaw tightened. God, you're insecure. There it was. I hadn't accused her of anything. I hadn't even mentioned his hand. Yet somehow I was jealous. Controlling. Small. She walked straight back to him. For the rest of the night, she avoided me. When guests wished me happy birthday, she stayed by Daniel's side, laughing, leaning in, touching his arm when she made a point. And every time I looked over, he was already looking at me. Not nervous. Amused. By midnight, the house was quiet. Empty glasses. Half-melted ice sculpture. The smell of expensive perfume and catered food lingering in the air. Ashley stood at the kitchen counter removing her earrings. You embarrassed me tonight, she said without turning around. I stared at her back. I embarrassed you? Yes. She placed the earrings down carefully. You made it obvious you don't trust me. In front of my boss. I let that settle. Not. I'm sorry that looked inappropriate. Not. I understand why that bothered you. Instead, I was the problem. His hand on you wasn't exactly subtle, I said calmly. She turned slowly, disbelief on her face. Oh my God. It was nothing. It didn't look like nothing. She laughed short, sharp. That's how high finance works. It's not your conservative little corporate office. People are tactile. Tactile. I swallowed. It felt disrespectful. To you, she corrected. Because you're projecting. Projecting. I had funded her MBA. I had signed personal guarantees so she could move to Manhattan when her salary wasn't enough. I had invested my own capital to help her build credibility. And now I was insecure about her success. You've always been threatened by my career, she continued. That's not true. It is. You just hide it better than most. The conversation was twisting in ways I couldn't control. She grabbed her phone off the counter. I'm not fighting about this on your birthday, she said, already walking away. She disappeared into the bedroom and closed the door. I stood alone in the kitchen, 40 years old, surrounded by the remnants of a party that suddenly felt staged. Later, lying in bed beside her, I watched the ceiling while she slept facing the opposite wall. I replayed everything. His hand, her smile, the way she looked at me like I was a nuisance. It wasn't jealousy keeping me awake. It was the feeling that I had just witnessed something I wasn't supposed to question. And that when I did, I became the villain. That night something shifted inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. That party wasn't just uncomfortable. It was the first crack in the foundation of my marriage. And I couldn't unsee it. The morning after my birthday party, Ashley left for the airport before I even got out of bed. Early flight, she said while buttoning her blazer in the hallway mirror. New York, back Thursday. She didn't kiss me goodbye. That used to bother me. Now it just felt consistent. After the front door closed, I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the previous night again. But this time something different happened. Instead of focusing on Daniel's hand on her waist, my mind started rewinding further back. Months, little moments I had brushed aside. Ashley's travel schedule had changed sometime in the spring. At first it sounded impressive. Board meetings, investor dinners, strategy sessions. She said Daniel relied on her now. Said she was indispensable. I was proud of her, but the trips were always vague. Back Wednesday evening, late Thursday. No idea yet, depends on how negotiations go. When I'd ask for details, she'd sigh. You wouldn't understand. It's fluid. Fluid. I remembered the first time she changed her phone password. We were sitting on the couch, and I reached for her phone to look up a restaurant she had mentioned. She took it from my hand faster than necessary. I updated security, she said quickly. Since when did married couples need updated security from each other? I had laughed it off. Told myself it was corporate compliance or some firm policy. Then came the gifts. A watch I couldn't pronounce. Cufflinks in a velvet box. A leather briefcase from the firm for closing a deal. I asked if spouses usually received gifts. Daniel believes in rewarding loyalty, she said. Daniel again. His name slipped into our conversations constantly. Daniel thinks this market is shifting. Daniel says only the aggressive survive. Daniel doesn't tolerate weakness. She quoted him like scripture. And gradually her tone changed when she talked to me. Less warmth. More critique. You're too conservative with your investments. You don't think big enough. You should surround yourself with more ambitious people. It wasn't advice. It was comparison. I started noticing how often she checked her phone at dinner. How she angled the screen away from me. How she smiled at messages and then muted the notifications. I had asked once, casually, "Who's lighting up your phone that much?" "Work," she answered without looking up. Always work. Our home life cooled in subtle ways. Conversations became transactional. Did you pay the property taxes? Did you sign the refinancing paperwork? Did you transfer funds to the joint account? She began pushing for new financial structures. Let's consolidate assets under one holding company. Let's restructure liabilities more efficiently. Let's move certain investments into separate vehicles for tax optimization. Sounded smart, sophisticated. She framed it as leveling up. But I was the one signing personal guarantees. I was the one leveraging credit lines built over decades. She called it strategy. I called it trust. There were nights she'd come home from New York smelling like a hotel lobby. Sterile, expensive, impersonal. She'd shower immediately. Always immediately. I never questioned it. Because questioning meant admitting I didn't like what the answers might be. And then there was the distance. It wasn't dramatic. It was erosion. She stopped reaching for my hand in public. Stopped asking about my day beyond surface details. Stopped laughing at my jokes. Physical int asterisk Macy became rare. Scheduled. Mechanical. When I asked if everything was okay between us, she'd say, "I'm just stressed." When I suggested a weekend away together, she'd say, "I can't right now. Timing is critical." Critical for what? I thought about the way she had looked at Daniel at my party. That wasn't stress. That was admiration. Maybe more. I remembered one specific night in June. She had returned from New York past midnight. I was awake in the living room. "You didn't have to wait up," she said sharply. "I wanted to," I replied. She softened slightly, but only slightly. "We're building something big, Mark. You need to understand that. We, not she, not the firm. We." At the time, I assumed she meant her team. Now I wasn't sure. Her language shifted in other ways too. She talked more about elite circles, about how access changes everything, about how ordinary people don't understand leverage. Sometimes she'd look around our house, our paid-off house, and say, "This is comfortable, but it's small thinking." Small thinking. That phrase stuck. I had built everything from nothing. No inheritance. No family connections. Just long hours and calculated risk. And suddenly it wasn't enough. The pattern was there. Trips, passwords, gifts, distance, restructured finances. And Daniel's name threaded through all of it. The birthday party hadn't been an isolated incident. It had been a reveal. I sat at the kitchen table that morning, coffee growing cold, and let the timeline assemble itself without excuses. If nothing was happening, why the secrecy? If it was purely professional, why the emotional glow when she spoke about him? If our marriage was solid, why did I feel like a sponsor instead of a husband? I realized something uncomfortable. I hadn't ignored the signs because I trusted her. I had ignored them because I didn't want to face the possibility that the woman I built my life around might be building a different one behind my back. That was harder to accept than any physical betrayal, because it meant I wasn't just being lied to. I was being replaced. And the worst part? The financial structures she had pushed for suddenly felt less like ambition, and more like positioning. Positioning for what? I didn't have proof yet, but I had clarity. And clarity is dangerous when you finally stop arguing with it. By the time my coffee was cold, I wasn't confused anymore. I was alert. Something had been happening for months, and I had just decided to stop pretending I couldn't see it. I didn't find the proof because I was looking for it. I found it because she got careless. 3 days after my birthday, Ashley texted me around noon. "Can you grab the blue folder from my office and scan the contracts? Need them ASAP." Her home office was usually off-limits when she was traveling. Not forbidden, just guarded. But this time she needed something quickly. I told myself it was normal. I went upstairs. Her desk was spotless, as always. Minimalist. Structured. Controlled. The blue folder was exactly where she said it would be. Next to it sat her work tablet. Unlocked. I stared at it longer than I should have. We had always respected each other's devices. That was our rule. Privacy without secrecy. But that line had started blurring months ago. I told myself I was just checking for the contracts in digital form. That's all. I picked it up. Her email was open. At first glance, it looked normal: market updates, internal memos, client threads. Then I saw a separate inbox. Not hidden. Just labeled differently. Private D. My pulse slowed instead of racing. That surprised me. I opened it. The first message was from Daniel. Not corporate tone. Not professional language. "Ash, last night was reckless. But I don't regret it." The date was from 2 weeks before my birthday. I felt something inside me go still. There were dozens of messages below it. I scrolled. Hotel confirmations forwarded between them. Inside jokes. Photos of skyline views from what looked like a Manhattan penthouse balcony. Then one that made everything irreversible. We need to accelerate restructuring before he notices. Not Mark. Another message from her. I'm working on the asset separation. Once the guarantees are in place, exposure shifts to him. I read that line 3 times. Exposure shifts to him. The affair wasn't emotional chaos. It was organized. Strategic. There were attached documents. Draft financial outlines. Projections. Loan structures that I had signed off on under the assumption they were expanding her firm's leverage. Instead, they insulated her. Assets tied to holding companies under her control. Liabilities anchored to joint obligations, many of which required my personal guarantee. If a collapse happened, I'd be legally responsible. If a divorce happened, she retained growth assets positioned separately. I sat down in her chair. My birthday party flashed through my head. Her annoyance, her contempt. It wasn't guilt. It was impatience. Another message from Daniel. Timing matters. After Q4, we can formalize everything. Formalize everything. Was that about the deal? Or about leaving me? I kept scrolling. A hotel invoice from Chicago, one of her board trips. A photo of her in a dress I had never seen. Not explicit. Just an asterisk made enough to confirm what I already knew. And then the final confirmation. Her message, sent at 1:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. He's distracted. He still thinks this is about career pressure. I felt something close to laughter rise in my throat. Career pressure. That's what she had reduced me to. A distraction. There were voice memos too. I didn't play them. I didn't need to. The pattern was undeniable. The relationship had been ongoing for at least 6 months, possibly longer, and intertwined with financial planning that positioned me as the safety net. Not the partner, the safety net. I closed the tablet slowly. I didn't throw it. I didn't shout. I didn't call her. Instead, I walked downstairs and made coffee. My hands were steady. That surprised me most of all. Anger would have been easier, but what I felt was colder. Calculation. For months, I had funded what I believed was my wife's ambition. In reality, I had been underwriting my own replacement. She wasn't trapped. She wasn't confused. She wasn't lonely. She was transitioning, and she thought I was too blind to notice. I replayed the financial conversations. Her insistence on restructuring loans. Her push to move certain properties into new entities. Her urgency about timing. It wasn't about growth. It was about insulation. And Daniel wasn't just her boss. He was her exit strategy. I opened my laptop, pulled up every document I had signed in the last year. Cross-referenced dates with the emails I had just seen. The overlap was precise. Strategic filings occurred within days of their private hotel stays. Legal adjustments followed major trips. This wasn't passion overriding judgment. This was partnership. Just not with me. I leaned back in my chair and let the reality settle fully. She hadn't just betrayed me physically. She had been planning a financial landing pad while using my credit history and guarantees as leverage. If I confronted her now, she would deny everything. Gaslight, cry, shift blame, destroy evidence. So I did nothing, at least outwardly. I scanned the blue folder like she asked, sent the contracts to her email, kept my message simple. Done. She replied with a heart emoji. I stared at it for a long time. That small red icon. As if none of this existed. As if I hadn't just uncovered months of deception layered inside spreadsheets and hotel confirmations. By the time evening came, I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was aware. And awareness changes everything. I didn't need more proof. I needed strategy. Because if she had been quietly restructuring our life behind my back, then I was going to quietly restructure mine. And unlike her, I wasn't going to underestimate the person sitting across from me. This wasn't going to be emotional. It was going to be precise. She thought exposure would shift to me. She had no idea how wrong that calculation was. I didn't confront her. That was the first decision. No dramatic phone call. No **TS sent in rage. No accusation waiting for her at the door when she came back from New York. Emotion would warn her. Emotion would give her time to adapt. And Ashley was very good at adapting. Instead, I did what I've always done best. I assessed risk. That night, after finding the emails, I opened every financial document tied to our names over the last 18 months. Loan agreements, investment transfers, holding company registrations, amendments I had signed because she said they were standard optimization. They weren't random. They were staggered. Personal guarantees under my name attached to expanding credit facilities. Equity allocations tilted subtly toward entities where she held majority operational control. On paper, it still looked joint. In practice, it wasn't. If something failed, I absorbed liability. If something succeeded, she captured upside. I almost admired the precision. Almost. The next morning, I scheduled 3 meetings. One with a forensic accountant. One with a litigation attorney specializing in high-asset divorce. One with a banking compliance officer I had known for 15 years. I didn't mention Ashley's affair. I didn't need to. I framed it as a risk exposure review. The accountant, a quiet man named Harrison, took 2 hours to review what I sent. When he finally leaned back in his chair, he didn't look surprised. "You're over-leveraged personally," he said calmly. "And strategically." "Explain," I replied. "These guarantees tie you to downside risk without proportional asset protection." Whoever structured this assumed continued cooperation. Continued cooperation. That was one way to put it. "And if cooperation ends?" I asked. He looked at me directly. "You're exposed." I nodded. Noted. The attorney meeting was colder. "Do you have proof of misconduct?" she asked. "Yes." "Documented?" "Yes." She didn't press for details. "In this state, infidelity won't guarantee everything," she said. "But financial manipulation changes leverage." That word again. Leverage. Ashley loved that word. The banking officer was the most practical conversation. "Authorizations can be revoked," he told me. "But timing matters. Once funds move beyond certain thresholds, retrieval becomes complicated. Timing matters." I understood that now more than ever. For the next 2 weeks, I acted normal. I asked about her meetings, listened to her stories about market volatility, nodded when she mentioned Daniel. Every smile she gave me felt rehearsed. Every "I love you" felt like a placeholder. Meanwhile, I moved quietly. I separated personal liquidity from joint accounts. Not illegally, not secretly, just strategically. Lines of credit tied to my creditworthiness were reduced. Automatic renewal clauses were reviewed. I requested audits under the guise of portfolio refinement. Ashley didn't notice at first. She was preparing for something bigger. I could see it in her energy. Late night calls, increased travel, whispers in the hallway. One evening she came home glowing. "Big movement coming," she said, pouring herself wine. "This changes everything." "For who?" I asked casually. "For us," she replied without hesitation. The word sounded hollow. I already knew what was coming. One of the attached emails on her tablet had mentioned Q4 acceleration, a major market entry tied to structured debt instruments, many of which carried my guarantee. If it succeeded, her firm expanded aggressively. If it collapsed, I carried residual liability. Exposure shifts to him. I hadn't forgotten that line, so I adjusted. 3 days before her scheduled New York trip for what she called the defining deal, I revoked my personal guarantee renewals where legally permissible. I froze extensions tied to joint expansion. I withdrew from co-signing a new capital injection she assumed was automatic. Everything done within contractual rights. Everything documented. I didn't tell her. The morning she left for New York, she kissed my cheek. "You'll be proud," she said. "I'm sure," I answered. 2 days later, my phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. Her name. I let it ring twice before answering. "What did you do?" she asked immediately. No hello. No pretense. "Clarify," I said calmly. They're saying authorizations were revoked. That guarantees shifted. Mark, this isn't funny. Funny. I reviewed my exposure, I replied. You can't do that mid-structure. This affects liquidity across multiple layers. Her voice wasn't angry. It was panicked. I acted within my rights, I said. You're sabotaging me. There it was. Me. Not us. Not the firm. Her. Am I? I asked quietly. There was silence. Then, Daniel is furious. Of course he was. Risk had appeared. And powerful men dislike risk when it isn't insulated by someone else. What happens now? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. They're reassessing, she said finally. But without your guarantees, leverage drops significantly. I leaned back in my chair. For months, I had been the invisible backbone supporting her expansion. She had assumed that backbone would never move. She assumed wrong. Mark, she said, voice softer now. Why are you doing this? I thought about telling her I knew everything. About the hotels, the restructuring, the calculated insulation. Instead, I said, I'm protecting myself. That's dramatic. Is it? Another silence. When she spoke again, the confidence was gone. We need to talk when I get back. Yes, I agreed. We do. The call ended. I sat in the quiet house and felt something unfamiliar. Not revenge. Not triumph. Control. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was dictating terms. She had built a system assuming my stability was permanent. She had built it assuming I would never look closely. But systems collapse when a single load-bearing pillar shifts. And I had just shifted. Her deal wasn't dead yet, but it was wounded. And I knew something else with certainty now. If Daniel was truly powerful, he would absorb risk. If he wasn't, he would disappear. Either way, the illusion was cracking, just like it had on my birthday. The difference now, this crack was deliberate, and I wasn't done. The collapse didn't happen in a dramatic explosion. It started with silence. 2 days after Ashley's panicked call from New York, I stopped hearing Daniel's name. No, Daniel thinks. No, Daniel says. No, Daniel wants. Just silence. Ashley came home on a Thursday afternoon instead of Saturday. That alone told me everything. She walked in without her usual momentum. No heels clicking with confidence. No phone pressed to her ear issuing instructions. She stood in the entryway for a moment like she wasn't sure this house was still hers. You're early, I said calmly from the dining table. She didn't respond right away. They pulled the deal, she finally said. I nodded once. Liquidity concerns, she added quickly. Temporary. It's not permanent. Of course, I replied. She dropped her bag harder than necessary. This didn't have to happen. There it was again. Not, I'm sorry. Not, we need to talk about us. Just damage control. You structured it assuming my guarantees would remain unconditional, I said evenly. They were unconditional. No, I corrected. They were cooperative. She stared at me. You knew timing was critical. Yes. And you still revoked them. Yes. Her composure cracked. Do you have any idea what this cost me? There it was. Me. Cost me. Not us. I stood slowly. I think I do. Her breathing grew sharper. Daniel had investors lined up. This was my entry into the senior partnership tier. Daniel again. Where is Daniel now? I asked quietly. She hesitated. They're reassessing structure. That wasn't my question. Silence. Her jaw tightened. He can't carry exposure alone. It's not how these deals work. No, it wasn't. That's why she needed me. And that's why he stayed comfortable. Until I moved. So he stepped back. I said. He's protecting the firm. Of course he was. Powerful men protect the firm. Not the woman who miscalculated. Interesting, I murmured. Her eyes sharpened. You did this on purpose. Yes. The word landed heavy. For a second, she looked almost stunned that I wasn't hiding it. You're sabotaging my career because you're insecure. I let out a slow breath. This has nothing to do with insecurity. Then what is it about? I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a thin folder I had prepared. I placed it on the table in front of her. Her eyes flicked down. What's this? Documentation. She didn't touch it. You accessed my devices. I reviewed what I legally had access to in our shared environment. Her face went pale. Mark, I know about the hotels. Silence. I know about the asset positioning. Silence. I know about exposure shifting. Her hand trembled slightly. It wasn't. Don't. I interrupted calmly. Don't insult both of us. She sank into a chair. For the first time since my birthday party, I saw something real in her expression. Not anger. Not superiority. Fear. You were planning, I continued. Not emotionally. Financially. She didn't deny it. That's not how it was supposed to unfold. Of course it wasn't. You assumed I wouldn't look closely. She looked up at me then, and for a moment I saw the old Ashley, the one who used to sit across from me in cheap diners planning a future. It got complicated, she said softly. No, I corrected. It got exposed. Her shoulders dropped. You don't understand the pressure I was under. I almost laughed. Pressure doesn't require restructuring liabilities to isolate a spouse. She had no response. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. The world kept moving. Inside, everything had already shifted. Daniel won't return your calls, will he? I asked quietly. Her silence was confirmation. He's protecting the firm, she repeated, but the words were hollow now. He's protecting himself, I said. That hit. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. That would have been easier. You think you've won something, she said after a moment. I shook my head. This isn't about winning. It feels vindictive. No, I replied evenly. It's structural. For months she had treated our marriage like a transaction to be phased out efficiently. I simply adjusted the math. Her phone buzzed on the table. She didn't pick it up. For the first time, she didn't rush to see who was calling. Because she already knew. Without your guarantees, she said quietly, my position weakens internally. I know. You've put me in a vulnerable spot. I held her gaze. You put me there first. That landed harder than anything else. The truth isn't loud. It's final. The next week unfolded quickly. Her firm announced internal restructuring. Her title was temporarily reassigned pending strategic review. Daniel stopped appearing in her stories entirely. Investors pulled back. Without leverage, momentum died. And momentum is everything in her world. She tried to spin it publicly. Posted about market recalibration. Shared articles about patience in volatility. But the inner circle knew. Access was gone. The invitations slowed. The calls shortened. Her value had been tied to expansion. Without expansion, she was just another executive. One evening, she stood in the living room, staring at the skyline beyond our windows. They're sidelining me, she said quietly. I didn't respond. You didn't just hurt the deal, she added. You changed my trajectory. I stepped closer but didn't touch her. You changed ours first. For once, she didn't argue. Because she knew. Her system hadn't collapsed because of jealousy. It collapsed because it was built on the assumption that I would always carry risk silently. I walked away without another word. Behind me, I heard her phone buzz again. This time she answered. Her voice was softer, less confident. Yes, I understand. The call ended quickly. Daniel didn't fight for her. He adjusted, just like she had planned to. Only this time, she was the expendable variable. And I was no longer the safety net. Ashley moved fast once reality set in. Within days, she began reframing the narrative. To colleagues, I was unstable. At home, she hinted that I'd sabotaged her out of jealousy. She even suggested I'd been emotionally withdrawing for months. It was strategic. If she couldn't protect the deal, she would protect her image. But documentation is louder than rumors. My attorney moved quietly, presenting financial records, timelines, and communications that dismantled her version of events. The restructuring attempts, the hidden projections, the exposure shift, it was all there. When her firm initiated an internal review, Daniel distanced himself completely. No public support, no defense. Her title was officially reduced. Access to high-risk portfolios revoked. Invitations stopped. The same circle that once applauded her ambition now avoided association. She tried once more, late at night standing in the kitchen. "We can fix this," she said. But it wasn't about us anymore. It was about damage control, and she had run out of leverage. The divorce finalized without spectacle. No courtroom drama, no shouting, just signatures, because once the financial structure was corrected, there was nothing left to negotiate. The liabilities untangled, the guarantees released, assets rebalanced legally and cleanly. Ashley left the city within months. No farewell party, no triumphant new position, just a quiet relocation to reset. I stayed long enough to close accounts, sell the house, and walk away from the skyline that once felt like ambition. I didn't replace the life immediately. I rebuilt slowly. Smaller investments, fewer risks, no flash. My 40th birthday used to feel like humiliation. Now I see it differently. It was the moment I stopped confusing loyalty with blindness. The day I realized that betrayal doesn't destroy you unless you refuse to see it. And I finally saw everything.